These people are so diabolical and blasphemous, Jeff, that the name of the street on which these people have placed their banking buildings is called Threadneedle Street. Now, for anybody who cares about biblical truth, it is harder for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. And these people are so blasphemous, they have a street in the city of London called Threadneedle Street. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. I hope you had a terrific weekend. It's Sunday, and that means it's time to hear from Jeff Nielson. Jeff, how are you, sir?
Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Well, I'm hanging in there, and we saw some crazy action last week. I want to talk to you about that because, the paper you wrote not too long ago called What is the Gold Standard that appeared over on Sprott Money is an important paper to discuss because we see what happens, Jeff, when there is no gold standard, there is no respect for honest money. The madmen just print more. We saw last week on Thursday, the ECB announced Bazooka money creation, boosting QE to 80 billion euro and adding IG bonds. What was the market's reaction? Stocks sold off and gold soared higher. Just look at gold when priced in Jeff's currency up there in Canada. In the Canadian dollar, gold is $1,697 an ounce. Jeff, the madmen are just going to print. That's the only answer they have.
Well, and of course, the automatic rebuttal to that is to refer back to Sir Alan Greenspan and his comment before he became a Fed prostitute, which was, in the absence of a gold standard, there is no way to prevent the confiscation of savings through inflation. And of course, the correct definition of inflation, which a professor like Alan Greenspan would know, is that it's an increase in the supply of money. There's no way to prevent confiscation of savings via an increase in supply of money without the gold standard because, as I mentioned in that white paper, the gold standard is, as John Keynes told us, the golden handcuffs. It prevents these criminals from committing the worst crimes. They can still commit little bits of crimes and not bust the system, but they can't commit the big mega crimes they've been committing over and over and over again on a daily basis.
Well, let's talk about what happened last week in the ECB. We saw Mario Draghi make a drastic announcement, and I think the bankers thought it would just help paper over their problems. But again, it suggests, according to Zero Hedge, that the age of central banker omnipotence is at an end because, again, the reaction was the opposite of what these criminal bankers wanted. Gold soared higher, Jeff, and it's only going to continue to soar higher as people around the world wake up to this criminality, which is boundless. And without a gold standard, without a silver standard, we're just sure to see hyperinflation and the death of all currencies.
Well, my take is slightly different on these events because I always look at what plays out in the mainstream media as theater. And what I'm basically seeing here is the same game I've seen on a lot of occasions in the past. And, the bankers make what they know is an announcement that's negative for their own system of currency fraud. So they allow a muted reaction to their latest fraudulent escapades to give the veneer that there are still markets out there. And then, of course, what's going to happen over the next few days is that the stocks will come back up again. The currencies will all steady, and then the mainstream media will say, "Oh, well, look, you see, this wasn't a big deal after all. The people who were reacting when it happened, they're just chicken littles. This is no big deal." And this is what I see over and over again. But of course, it depends on what paradigm you subscribe to. For me, we don't have markets. We just have a permanent price rigging operation. So, when you see gold rise, it's because the bankers are letting it rise, and they're letting it rise for the theatrical purposes. Let's show a reaction today and then hammer it back down again and tell everybody it's no big deal.
Well, you know what? I want to counter that, though, with just the reminder that on January 28th, we saw the London silver fix break for really the first time in documented history, as far as I know. I mean, we know the criminal bankers in the city of London set the prices for gold and silver twice a day. Then back, I think, in March of, 2014, they moved to the electronic silver fix. But the silver fix broke on January 28th, and they haven't been able to break the back of silver and gold since, Jeff. I mean, we see gold, at least, breaking the 200-day moving average. And really, on a technical basis, which we don't cover here very much because, of course, we know that the cartel manipulates the hell out of gold and silver through the paper markets. But even on a technical basis, gold is very, very strong, and they haven't been able to bring it back down. Now, is your take that they're going to here at some point?
Oh, because most definitely. I've been banging the drum for several weeks now that this is all a deliberate false rally to set precious metals up for a better crash, because you couldn't crash gold from $1,100. You can't crash it down to 8 or 7. You couldn't crash silver when it was below $14. You have to take it up higher and then you can crash it. So this is a false rally. They're building false momentum, false enthusiasm in the sector, and then they're going to ambush us. And the point is this is carved in stone, because the next crash is coming. I mean, I've been writing about that for nearly 2 years now, and it's coming most likely in May. Could happen in April, could be as late as June, but it's definitely coming within that window. And when that happens, they are not going to allow gold and silver to rally. They're not even going to allow it to be steady. They're going to hammer them down and say, look, they're not safe havens. So this is definitely coming. It's total setup and just more theater. And I mean, it's comical, because I've been saying this, of course, myself for several weeks now. Last week, Citigroup comes out and they predict, quote unquote, that gold's going to continue rallying for a little while longer and then it's going to sink down at the end of the year. And then this week we get, of course, the ultimate gold mouthpiece, Jeffrey Christian, spouting off, and his prediction is, surprise, surprise, that there's going to be a short-term rally in gold and then it's going to pull back in the last few quarters. So, I mean, these are people who are given the script. So, when they, and of course, not everybody is going to be reading off of the correct script. They need people on both sides to create the noise and the deer in the headlights syndrome, where people don't know what the hell to do. But when you see these mouthpieces of the bankers spouting off about short-term rally and then pulling back, I just look at people that have been given the script and they know what's coming.
Yeah, but let's talk about the reality of the situation. If you have physical gold and silver, right, and you live in Russia, you've seen the value of your gold, I think, double over the past year or two. Look at what's going on in Venezuela. Absolute economic chaos. Look what's happening in Brazil. The economy has never looked worse in Brazil. And look what's happening up in your neck of the woods in Canada. Again, gold is priced at $1,697 per ounce, Jeff. And it wasn't that long ago, Jeff, that the loonie was more valuable than the dollar. So again, we're talking about gold being priced in dollars as a real value at this price today. And if they're going to take it down lower again, because I do believe they have the power to still do it, it just represents the true life raft that it is, should we find ourselves in the same boat as Venezuelans. And Jeff, I think that day is coming. I mean, again, look what's going on in Vancouver up in your neck of the woods. You see housing prices in the millions of dollars for dumps. This is just absolute unsustainable chaos globally.
Well, let's not mistake what I'm saying here. I'm not in any way cautioning people away from gold and silver. I mean, regardless of the nominal paper price, the ounce of silver is going to be an ounce of silver tomorrow. It's going to be an ounce of silver next year. It's going to be an ounce of silver 100 years from now, and its value is going to remain the same. The nominal paper price is essentially irrelevant in the long term. It's certainly relevant in the immediate term because it's what we pay for things. But over the long term, these nominal paper prices are totally irrelevant. It's all just more manipulation and theater. And of course, the big point with the current manipulation game, where there's basically one currency propped up to an insane height and everything else taken down, is the bankers are particularly worried about people losing faith in the US dollar just as they're about to stage their next crash. Because, of course, the dollar is supposed to be the safe haven for the sheep to run to, so they need it propped up way high so even the most myopic sheep can look and see the dollar perched miles above everything else, and when the panic starts, they'll run to the greenback, even though it's totally worthless.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Jeff, I should have mentioned the yen, the Japanese yen. Look at the price of gold in yen, and it reminds me of what Andy Hoffman has been telling us. He believes that the first world nation that will suffer hyperinflation will be Japan. And if you take a look at the madness going on in Japan, they're issuing bonds, Jeff, 30 years out, and they don't have the demographics to support additional bonds going 10 years out. The crash is a certainty. The collapse of Japan is an absolute certainty. Now, Jeff, my question to you is, what would happen if the citizens of Japan wake up to the facts that I've just mentioned and turn to physical gold and physical silver?
It's a difficult question to answer because it's hard to envision that attitude, returning to the Japanese population. And the thing with Japan that's always made it somewhat complicated is what we've always been told is that the Japanese population has this phenomenal block of savings. And this phenomenal block of domestic wealth can finance deficit levels that would drive other nations into bankruptcy. Now, of course, this is something that's been said for many, many years now. So, I mean, maybe things have progressed to the point where it's no longer even a legitimate factor, but it's just more along the lines of an excuse to justify the insanity. But, I think there's at least some difference in Eastern nations and Western nations in terms of the Eastern nations having a much more savings conscious mentality. And you see, the thing is, we hear talk about quote unquote savings rates in Western populations. And what people have to understand there is that these are aggregate numbers. So if you have a handful of oligarchs, steal another few $1 trillion and stick it into their hoards, this boosts the saving rates for the whole population. Even though, of course, 99% of the population has probably been disgorging savings. They actually have less because they're having to cannibalize whatever they've got tucked away. So, there's basically no savings in the West. We've got this tiny sliver that's called the middle class that is, kind of treading water. We've got the working poor, which is now the majority, and below them the poor, and then we've got the small caste of upper class who are thriving, and they're the only ones doing any saving. But the point is their savings are useless because they will never spend or invest that money into the economy. All they will ever do is lend it into the economy and then encumber us with even more debt. So, you know, not only are the savings rates between East and West dramatically different, but the composition of those savings are significantly different. The average person has no savings in the West. The average person has lots of savings in the East. I just saw a stat the other day on the savings levels in China, and I just shook my head because it was such a phenomenally large number, and I wish I could quote it offhand, but I can't remember it right now. But many, an order of magnitude greater than what the average person has in the West. And so when you have such large blocks of domestic savings, so that a nation doesn't have to borrow outside to finance, then there is the possibility of preserving the currency, because it's ultimately the need for foreign money and borrowing foreign money that tilts the balance and drives down the value of these currencies, even in this current atmosphere.
You make a good point about the savings rate in the West. I just saw an article the other day that said something like somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% of Americans cannot raise $400 should they need it in an emergency. And,
Yeah.
it reminds me of what happened after 9/11 when Bush came out and said the best way you can help is just to get back out and do what you do. Go shopping. The mentality of the people in Japan and the mentality of the people in the United States is a result of the brainwashing operation of these banksters over past decades. Taking the silver and gold out of our money, washing it generationally from the minds of the people. Gold and silver are a representation of real wealth in the East. And you recently wrote an article about this called The Two Worlds of Precious Metals, East and West. And I just want to read a passage from it and get your impression on the scarcity of gold and silver versus the scarcity of cash. Because now, Jeff, these criminals want to ban cash. And if Larry Summers, the criminal that he is, gets his way and the bankers get their way, they're going to do away with the $100 note in the United States, thereby draining 78% of available cash from the system because they want to trap people in their criminal banks. And you write in your article, gold and silver are perfect money, but they are also more than that. They are forms of money which are available at what must be termed near optimal quantities to fulfill two separate but equally important functions. Silver is rare enough to be valued for its scarcity, but plentiful enough to be the ideal people's money, the wages of the workers, the metals of payment for basic commerce. Of course, what you're talking about there, Jeff, is the history of gold and silver. That was true for some 5,000 years. Now, again, they've brainwashed the people into believing gold and silver have no value. They're barbarous relics. And yet the truth of the matter is they're so scarce when compared to cash that it's stunning. And cash will soon be scarce because they're going to ban cash. So how valuable does that make gold and silver in physical form, Jeff?
Well, of course, another fear I've raised as we move towards the ban on cash is that I can't imagine these same corrupt, oppressive regimes allowing people to transfer their wealth into gold and silver as they ban cash, because even for a lot of the brainwashed sheep, that's going to be an idea which will occur to them. And that would allow a mass exodus of wealth out of their corrupt paper-based system and into real money where it can't be stolen. So my great fear is that the ban on cash will be accompanied by some form of bullion confiscation or simply a ban on possessing bullion. And of course, at that point, we're forced into a world of black markets. And then it just becomes what is the counter response to that? Do they go full Nazi and start immediately clamping down on all of this? I mean, of course, in the U.S., they have all of these empty gulags just waiting for residents, and so I mean, I see all these things, and I don't see any clear path to safety. I see any potential path to safety with basically a sort of Damocles hanging above it. And uh, this is why I've always preached from day one of Bullion Bulls Canada that people need to diversify even with respect to their precious metals holdings. And so, of course, I definitely have my bullion holdings, but I haven't gotten rid of my mining shares, even though they've been hammered beyond belief. Because if in fact there is bullion confiscation and our governments go full Nazi and start busting down doors and punching holes in walls, then our only exposure to precious metals that maybe remain legal to us is to own interests in the miners.
Well, the mining stocks have definitely staged a rally. And again, I brought up the GDX chart as an example of how the wealthy, the bankers, the insiders, will leverage the rising prices of gold and silver by multiples through the precious metals mining stocks. And I don't think it's a bad idea. The other thing, Jeff, that we need to remind people is that to diversify your holdings offshore definitely makes sense. I mean, some of it should be in your possession. Some of it should be held outside of the United States, outside of Canada. There are great options out there to diversify your money offshore. The question is, how do you trust a system that is globally criminal, Jeff?
Now, here I wouldn't presume to try to offer a superior opinion to people like James Turk or Eric Sprott. And, so from my perspective, uh, I think that the point you raise that's most important here is not so much where you choose to focus your offshore investing, but who you do it through. Because if you do it through people who are reputable and honorable, I think that's your best chance, irrespective of where they're deciding to park their these bullion holdings or other types of investment holdings.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other thing I'd say, Jeff, is that it appears that the Eurozone has a 5-year plan in place to ban cash entirely. They're going to start with the 500 euro note, and eventually they want it all gone. And I think what these criminals are doing is they're forcing the people into a revolutionary stance. They're forcing the people globally on their heels in the West into a revolutionary stance because people are so fed up and so angry with their misrepresentation within these governments. And the system, the state, is the enemy in so many cases, and people are waking up to it globally, and they are going to force a revolution. I mean, look what's going on in the Eurozone with this refugee crisis. You've got tens of thousands of refugees running around, and there's no money to house them. There's no jobs for these people. They're not following the law, many of them. And that's just one example of the nightmare that people are experiencing. And we're going to experience many more of those nightmares in the United States, Jeff. I mean, 46 million people on food stamps, $19.5 trillion in debt. I mean, anybody who's thinking can see the end is coming. And when the end comes, it's going to get dark. These people are going to force a revolution.
Well, I try to be a student of history. And, one of the things I've read over the years are philosophers who postulate the existence of a quote unquote super cycle of roughly 300 years in length as being the length of time that humanity has demonstrated it can go without a major revolutionary cycle. And of course, the question is whether these are actually organic cycles or whether they're managed cycles. We don't have any guidance there at all. But let's assume for a moment that they are managed cycles. We're approaching the time when this current cycle is going to end. And let's look back to the end of the last cycle, which began to unravel and come to an end in the 1700s. And what we saw then, of course, is all of the monarchies swept out of power, abolished, or simply, voluntarily abdicating and remaining in some sort of figurehead role. And they were assigned all the blame for that era of oppression that existed under those monarchies. The oligarchs behind those monarchs just disappeared. And of course, we know the name of some of those oligarchs. It starts with an R.
I was just going to mention that.
And so, I mean,
we know who they are today, Jeff. We know who they are. Two of them start with R's. Rockefeller,
we see,
Rothschild. Yeah. We know who they are now. We know where the City of London is. And in fact, I have a friend over there near the City of London. His name is Andy, and I'm going to do a special video about the City of London because I think it's so stunning that it even exists. In the Rothschild building, hiding there in plain sight, right? And Andy's a photographer. And he was kind enough to offer to shoot pictures of the City of London for me because I'm going to do a special video about this to really call this out. I want people to understand what the City of London is and what it looks like. We know who these people are. These people are so diabolical and blasphemous, Jeff, that the name of the street on which these people have placed their banking buildings is called Threadneedle Street. Now, for anybody who cares about biblical truth, it is harder for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. And these people are so blasphemous, they have a street in the City of London called Threadneedle Street. Jeff, we know who they are.
So I never made that connection before. I think that's really interesting, and I'm glad you pointed that out. But I mean, and this is the whole point. If these people are actually puppet masters to that extent, then what we see right now is them having their one big final steal. Then they're going to detonate a revolutionary cycle themselves, disappear again with most of the wealth, allow our puppet governments to take the blame, and allow us to turn our wrath on those puppet governments, and then they're just going to stand aside and allow the havoc to unfold. Or, of course, maybe try to manage it to a certain extent so that they can be the guides for the next cycle as we climb out of the ashes. So, this is something that I consider to be a very plausible scenario, because certainly we look all around us, and what we see is not simply that this and that and the next thing is unsustainable. What we see are that things are so radically broken that it's amazing that they've been able to hold together this long, and everything could collapse tomorrow. I mean, this is where we are right now. And so if you're puppet masters, which brought us to this point of catastrophe, the only end game seems to be one big steal and then disappear.
Well, Jeff, let me ask you one last thing, because, we say this a lot. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Just the other day, we saw that the New York Fed was hacked and $100 million of Bangladesh's money was stolen. And the New York Fed is saying, hey, it's not our fault. And Bangladesh is saying, our money was held with you. We want our money back. It is your fault. And the New York Fed is saying, no. It looks like everything was fine on our end. It wasn't our systems. This is your fault. And it just occurs to me that whether it's physical gold and silver, Jeff, or cash, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. These guys are just going to take it all.
Well, and this is the whole point of creating this cashless electronic world. It's that much easier to rape and pillage financially. The idea was to get us out of gold and silver and into paper, because those paper instruments were very easily corruptible. But of course, taking everything electronic is an order of magnitude further in terms of facilitating systemic crime. And of course, this is what we're dealing with is a crime syndicate system, an organized crime paradigm where everything is run exactly according to the mafia handbook. And the only difference is that these mafioso wear much more expensive suits.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you wrote in this piece that I was quoting from earlier, our economies have been destroyed. Our governments have been bankrupted, and the currency in our wallets is already fundamentally worthless. And guys, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse from here. They have no answers. They don't want to change. They don't want to turn back to honor. They don't want to do a debt jubilee globally for the people. They are just going to drive these currencies into the ground through their funny money printing presses. And Jeff, at the end of the day, that's the most important message we can convey with listeners. What's happening in Venezuela right now is eventually going to happen to all of these first world countries.
Competitive devaluation. It's the official policy, racing to see which government can drive their currency to zero the fastest. I mean, it's not even, they're not even covering up competitive devaluation. It's a euphemism, but I mean, you don't require a lot of brain cells to translate it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, that's why we love to have you on. You're such a lucid thinker and such a terrific writer. I want to remind everybody that your website is bullionbullscanada.com, and you also write for Sprott. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Jeff?
Yeah, I've been a contributing writer for the blog at Sprott Money for about 2 years now, and forged a great relationship with that company, and they provided some wonderful exposure for my work, so I'm very enthused about the relationship.
Well, I'm very enthused about our relationship. You're one of the first guests I ever had on. You've been a longtime guest and a longtime friend to SGT Report, and I want to thank you for your work and your voice, Jeff.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jeff. And guys, thank you so much for your support. Honestly, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Thank you for spreading this information with your friends, family, and your colleagues. Wake them up. My God, time is running short. We've been saying it for a very long time. Gold, when priced in Canadian dollars, is $1,697 an ounce, and I think it'll eventually be well over $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. It's time to wake up your friends and neighbors. Guys, thanks for your support at sgtreport.com, thelibertymill.com, and check us out at thephaser.com. Real news, 24/7. Have a terrific week ahead.